January 1943, Central Germany, before dawn. Factory lights come back on while the smoke still hangs in the air. Repair crews move through shattered roofs, stepping over glass that has not yet cooled. Rail workers measure twisted track sections, knowing replacements may not arrive. Sirens are silent, but no one trusts the quiet. In the West, engines are already being reported, heard before sunrise, long before alarms. For years, German planners believed air attacks came in episodes. Raids destroyed, then they ended. Damage could be measured. Repairs could begin. Crews could rest. Even under bombardment, the war in the air allowed time to breathe. That assumption is gone. Night no longer brings relief. Daylight no longer feels safe. Bombers arrive before recovery finishes, before reports are filed, before yesterday is understood. What once felt like pressure now feels like permanence. Inside factories, command offices, and air defense posts, a realization begins to spread, not through panic but through repetition. This is not a campaign meant to shock and withdraw. It is a system designed to stay, and Germany is only beginning to understand what it means to fight an enemy whose air power no longer pauses. For most of the war, Germany believed it understood how air power worked. The assumption was not careless. It was built on experience. In the First World War, aircraft harassed but did not decide outcomes. Between the wars, air theory promised much, but reality imposed limits: weather, navigation, fatigue, production. Even in 1939 and 1940, air campaigns followed rhythms. They surged, inflicted damage, and then slowed. The pauses mattered as much as the attacks. Germany's own air doctrine reinforced this belief. The Luftwaffe was designed for decisive, short-range operations in support of ground forces. It excelled in concentrated effort: Poland, France, the early phases of the war in the East. Air power was meant to break resistance quickly, not apply endless pressure. When resistance stiffened, operations adjusted. When losses mounted, tempo eased. Britain's bombing campaign appeared to confirm these expectations. After heavy daylight losses in 1940, the Royal Air Force shifted to night bombing. Raids became frequent, but accuracy suffered. Cities were damaged, civilians killed, but German industry adapted. Factories repaired damage between attacks, transportation recovered. Civil defense systems absorbed the shock. The bombing was dangerous, but it ended with dawn. German air defenses evolved around this reality. Flak belts protected major cities. Night fighters hunted bombers after dark. Repair units specialized in rapid recovery. Production schedules assumed interruption followed by resumption. The entire system depended on intervals of relative calm. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, German leaders expected more of the same, only louder. American industrial power was respected, but distance imposed limits. Airfields would need to be built, crews trained, aircraft shipped. The air war, Germany believed, would remain divided by night and day, by seasons, by exhaustion. Early American operations in 1942 seemed to support that view. Small U.S. bomber forces attempted daylight raids and suffered heavy losses. German fighters intercepted them, much as they had the RAF before. American formations withdrew, regrouped, adjusted. To German observers, this looked like learning under constraint, not the opening of something new. What Germany did not yet see was the system behind those early setbacks. American air power was not designed around individual raids. It was designed around continuity. Aircraft production expanded month by month. Training pipelines ran without pause. Crews were standardized, replaced, scheduled. Losses were expected, calculated, absorbed. Where Germany measured strength in experienced pilots and finite machines, the United States measured it in output and tempo. This difference became policy in early 1943. At the Casablanca Conference, Allied leaders approved the combined bomber offensive. Its logic was explicit. The RAF would continue bombing at night. The U.S. Army Air Forces would strike by day. Pressure would be constant. There would be no handover period, no recovery window. German industry, air defenses, and transportation systems would be forced to function under uninterrupted strain. The point-blank directive sharpened the focus. Aircraft production, fuel facilities, ball-bearing plants, and fighter forces were to be attacked systematically, not to terrorize civilians, but to dismantle Germany's capacity to resist in the air. The objective was not destruction alone, it was denial of recovery. By mid-1943, the change became visible. American bomber formations grew thicker. Raids followed one another before repairs were complete. Escort fighters pushed deeper into Germany, extending protection and forcing Luftwaffe units into repeated engagements. Weather delayed missions, but did not halt the campaign. If one target could not be struck, another was chosen. German defenses reacted, but always late. Fighters were shifted from other fronts. Flak batteries multiplied. Production dispersed further underground. Each adaptation consumed time, and time was now the resource under attack. For the first time, Germany faced an air war that did not behave like a storm that passed. It behaved like a presence. And as American air power expanded across the Reich, German planners began to sense that the assumptions holding their system together were eroding, setting the stage for a confrontation in which pressure would no longer build toward release, but toward exhaustion. German planners expected that inflicting losses would eventually reduce American pressure. It never did. Aircraft destroyed over Germany were replaced faster than their absence could shape planning. U.S. factories produced bombers and fighters in numbers that increased even as losses mounted. Crews followed the same logic. Training pipelines ran continuously, delivering replacements already scheduled into units. For Germany, this was disorienting. Tactical success no longer produced operational relief. A costly interception might destroy several bombers. Yet the next raid arrived larger than the last. Losses did not create pauses. They triggered replacement. American air power was not weakened by damage, it absorbed it. German industry could not mirror this flexibility. Skilled labor was finite. Dispersal reduced efficiency. Underground production slowed assembly. Each response to bombing preserved output at the cost of coherence. Where American industry generated momentum, German industry accumulated strain. Air war had once been defined by cycles: attack, assessment, repair. American operations erased those cycles. Bombing schedules were built around tempo, not opportunity. If weather blocked one route, another was flown. If a target could not be struck, a substitute was chosen. Rail yards, airfields, and power stations were hit repeatedly because they could not be moved. Repairs were attacked as they began. German maintenance units worked under the expectation that damage would return before stabilization. Aircraft were flown with incomplete repairs. Crews launched tired, not from desperation, but because delay only worsened the imbalance. The Luftwaffe had been designed for decisive engagements, not constant defense. Instead of choosing when to fight, it reacted daily to an enemy that dictated tempo. Exhaustion replaced strategy. Germany's air defenses were formidable in isolation. Dense flak belts, experienced pilots, integrated warning systems. Against permanence, they faltered. Ammunition consumption surged, maintenance schedules collapsed, fighter units scrambled, repeatedly, often before refueling or rearming fully. Losses accumulated not through catastrophe, but repetition. Veteran pilots were lost faster than they could be replaced. New pilots arrived with fewer hours and less preparation. Fatigue became structural. Even success felt temporary. Worst of all, defenses could not choose rest. American air power decided when pressure would be applied. German systems merely responded. For civilians, the disappearance of pauses altered daily life more than any single raid. Sirens no longer marked a beginning and end. Nights brought bombing. Days brought repair and more bombers. Workers slept in shifts near shelters. Cities existed in anticipation rather than recovery. Leadership faced the same compression. Decisions were made without time to evaluate outcomes. Resources were shifted constantly. Committees multiplied. Planning horizons shrank from months to days. The war in the air no longer allowed reflection, only reaction. Across factories, airfields, and homes, the same lesson took shape. Endurance depended on intervals, and the intervals were gone. That realization would soon harden into certainty as uninterrupted pressure pushed German systems past the point where adaptation could keep pace, bringing the air war to its decisive phase. By early 1944, Germany's air defense system was no longer stabilizing between attacks. American bomber streams arrived with regularity that felt mechanical. Escort fighters now ranged freely over central Germany, engaging interceptors above airfields, fuel depots, and factories. What had once been contested airspace became permanently dangerous for German aircraft. Operations in 1943 had already hinted at this shift. Raids such as Regensburg and Schweinfurt demonstrated American willingness to accept heavy losses in pursuit of industrial targets. The deeper lesson was not the damage inflicted, but the refusal to stop. Ball-bearing production was disrupted, resumed, and struck again before efficiency recovered. Transportation delays multiplied, stockpiles thinned. In February 1944, the air war crossed a threshold. During what Allied planners called Big Week, American and British forces targeted aircraft assembly plants, engine factories, and component facilities across the Reich. The objective was not simply destruction, it was compulsion. German fighter units were forced into repeated combat, day after day, without respite. The Luftwaffe responded with everything it had left. Pilots flew multiple sorties per day. Aircraft launched without full inspections. Fuel reserves shrank rapidly. Losses that once would have prompted reorganization vanished into daily averages. American bombers continued regardless. Escort fighters pressed the advantage, staying with bomber formations deeper into Germany than ever before. German interceptors found themselves fighting not at the edge of the Reich, but above their own infrastructure. Survivability declined. Experience drained away. At the same time, transportation networks came under sustained attack. Rail junctions were struck repeatedly. Bridges were destroyed as repairs began. Coal deliveries slowed. Power outages spread. Each disruption fed the next. By spring, the Luftwaffe still existed, but it no longer controlled the conditions of its own survival. Aircraft production figures rose on paper, yet fuel shortages grounded units. Training was cut to preserve supplies, producing pilots unprepared for constant combat. Command and control degraded under continuous strain. For civilians, the change was unmistakable. Bombing no longer arrived as an event. It arrived as routine. Rebuilding no longer led toward safety, only toward the next strike. The decisive moment did not come as a dramatic collapse. It came as recognition. Germany was no longer fighting an enemy it could outlast. It was fighting a system designed to remain present until resistance failed. And by the time Allied planners turned their attention toward landing forces on the European continent, Germany's air defenses were already fighting to endure rather than to control, leaving the ground war to unfold under skies Germany could no longer protect. The consequences of uninterrupted American air power became fully visible in 1944. German industry continued to produce, but no longer functioned as a unified system. Factories completed components that could not be assembled on schedule. Finished aircraft waited for engines delayed by transportation strikes. Fuel shortages grounded units that technically existed. Production survived in fragments. Transportation absorbed the greatest damage. Rail networks were struck as soon as repairs began. Marshalling yards became recurring targets. Bridges were destroyed repeatedly. Coal and fuel deliveries slowed to a crawl, affecting power generation, manufacturing, and movement simultaneously. Logistics, once Germany's strength, became its constraint. The Luftwaffe paid the price directly. Fighter units assigned to defend the Reich lacked fuel to train or maneuver. Veteran pilots were lost faster than experience could be replaced. New pilots entered combat with minimal preparation, flying against an enemy whose systems continued to rotate fresh crews and aircraft without pause. Civil defense systems reached exhaustion. Fire brigades and medical services operated continuously. Housing shortages worsened as repairs lagged behind destruction. Evacuations displaced millions, disrupting labor and social stability. Civilians lived under a constant expectation of attack, with no return to normal between raids. When Allied forces landed in Normandy, German reserves existed largely on paper. Rail lines were broken. Roads were cratered. Fuel shortages forced commanders to choose which units could move at all. The Luftwaffe, once expected to contest Allied air superiority, could not concentrate its remaining strength. American air power continued to shape the battlefield inland. Retreating units faced destroyed infrastructure behind them and attack from above during movement. Coordination faltered. Delays multiplied. Defensive strategy replaced maneuver. Germany was not defeated from the air because its cities were destroyed outright. It was defeated because uninterrupted air power removed the conditions necessary for recovery, forcing every system to operate permanently under strain. What remained was endurance without relief. And endurance without relief does not last. What Germany ultimately learned from American air power was not simply that its cities could be bombed or its aircraft destroyed. It learned that modern war could be fought without interruption, and that this mattered more than any single act of destruction. Before the combined bomber offensive, air warfare still obeyed familiar rhythms. Attacks came. Damage followed. Recovery began. Even under pressure, systems relied on pauses to restore balance. American air power erased that assumption by sustaining operations regardless of loss, weather, or fatigue. It transformed air war from a series of events into a permanent condition. This approach did not require perfection. Aircraft were lost. Crews were killed. Missions failed. But the system continued because it was built to absorb damage without slowing. The enemy was forced to operate continuously under strain, while the attacker retained the ability to rotate, replace, and renew. Germany's defeat in the air did not arrive in a dramatic moment. It arrived gradually, as choices disappeared. Production continued, but could not be coordinated. Defenses fought, but could not recover. Civilians endured, but never rested. Leadership improvised because planning no longer had time to mature. The lesson extended far beyond the ruins of the Reich. Future militaries would study not just the power of bombing, but the power of continuity. Victory would no longer depend solely on decisive engagements, but on which side could deny the other the ability to recover. For those living beneath the contrails, the meaning was simpler. War no longer came and went. It remained overhead, shaping every decision, every movement, every night of sleep. When air power stopped pausing, the outcome was no longer determined by who struck hardest. It was decided by who could remain present the longest.